Okay, let's talk about caveats to this technique. The first thing is putting multiple CK editors, either the old version or the new version, is normally not a good experience. If you have any partial refreshes going on, what ends up happening is as soon as the CK editor instantiates itself, it wants to grab focus of the page and move it up or down in apparently some sort of a random fashion. I'm sure that it's supposed to try to put focus on the CK editor, but in real life what ends up happening is if you have three rich text editors or CK editors on your page and then a radio button that says, hey, click here and if yes, show another field. Well, it does a partial refresh. As soon as it does that, all the CK editors reinstantiate themselves, which you have to do, otherwise you won't get them after the partial refresh. And as soon as they reinstantiate themselves, then the page moves either up and down, and it's totally random. It doesn't actually like place focus on it. It just goes up a little bit, and it's very distracting. We have not found a solution to that, and the research that I've done on the Google, as Tim Tripconi says, is basically that nobody else has found a solution to it either. It's a problem, and it's not just XPages, it's everybody. So putting multiple CK editors on a page, if you have partial refreshes, probably not going to be a great user experience. The second thing is, in order to do in our application, we almost never, well, our application is associated with multiple data sources. So in this case, the CK editor or the rich text field is basically saving to a single data source, and no problem with that. This thing will work just fine, just like this. So, but if in our application, when we do this, every single response actually gets assigned to a unique document, a unique data source. So in order to do that, in order to display multiple CK editors either within the same page, which I just said is a bad idea, or within sort of a conglomerate record like a questionnaire, and show that across multiple pages to the same user, well, you can't hard code the names of these attributes. So the way we do that is our application does all of this, basically the same technique that I just showed you. However, everything is back-ended and scoped to a session-scoped bean. The bean does a lot of information tracking, including saving whatever data just got saved. It saves that into the bean as well as to the document, so it persists the actual data model in memory all the time, as well as on data or on disk. But because of that, we have the ability to do things like, instead of this computed field having a value where it says right here a field name and then a field name, we actually make these get their value from the bean, and the bean uses the unit of the data source to be a unique value. So they're quote-unquote guaranteed to be unique within the notes database. So the consequently is when we insert those values, it's actually a unit, and then the associated rich or multi-line edit box, its class value right here would also be calculated or computed to be the unit. And we can do that because the session bean knows what document we're talking about for this user, and we know which unit to give both of these controls. So in a larger context, if you're going to use this technique, you're going to have to figure out a way to associate multiple kind of control links if the bean way doesn't really suit you. The other thing that probably needs to be talked about here is validation. Validation worked like a champ here. It worked just the way you would want it to work. However, if you're going to go with like a partial refresh situation, then you're going to have to come up with some code to persist the values afterwards, after the partial refresh and after the instantiation happens. Because here's what happens: you click the magic button, the data got copied from the CK editor into the scratch text field, but then some other field on the document did not validate, and so the page doesn't get saved, the data does not get saved, and in the meantime your CK editor now has it reinstantiates, but it now has the old data. So it has the data from the data document, not the data that they might have just typed in. So what we did was we basically wrote a little bit of extra code that basically persists that, and we actually had another field, another hidden field that persists the name of the CKEditor field. So it gets a little more complex, but the bottom line is you just got to figure out a way to persist the data and in between the partial refreshes. Otherwise, you're going to display to the user the old data that was in the CKEditor. So in a straight situation like this, you're going to be good. If you're going to do anything fancy, you need to come up with a slightly more detailed solution. And if you have questions about that, I can certainly just email me or contact me, and I'll share that with you, or give you a kind of point you on the way to go. The last thing I just want to mention here is, and I know this is kind of a real rough cut video, but there's a couple places if you only want to use this solution for your iPad. And by the way, we only use this for the iPad, but our testing indicates that this particular solution would work just fine even in a desktop browser. We don't have anybody using the Notes client, so that's not something we would even attempt, and it doesn't work. But we don't care because we don't have anybody using a Notes client. But if you only want something to load up when an iPad is in use, then you're going to need to use something along this lines, where you basically say, hey, I only want that to show up, so let's do something a little bit better there. I'm just going to use this because it'll show up. That's actually that code. So it pretty much would just say, hey, if the user agent is an iPad, if it's true, then display or load this thing, and if not, then don't load it. So in our application, we actually have two custom controls. One is the iPad rich text custom control. It has some properties that get some values fed into it for the field mapping and unit and name and that kind of thing. And then we have a separate control that does regular old rich text. And so if the iPad is in play, then the iPad control is loaded. Otherwise, the regular one is loaded. As I mentioned earlier in the video, you get full fidelity between the two. So if you have, if somebody edits the content using the iPad, well, it all gets converted to MIME, and MIME is MIME. Doesn't matter what client you use to open it. So if they use the iPad to edit this content and they save it, life's good. Somebody else uses a web browser to open it up, it's going to look just the same. And then if they edit it in the web browser, again, it's automatically going to be converted to MIME if you're using the standard CKEditor XPages mechanism. But then if somebody opens up with the iPad, this iPad version will, the CKEditor will read the MIME as well. I did also experiment a little bit with just a text field, because I thought, oh, what the heck, it's HTML, right? So we'll just get a text field and just display the text field. Well, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to run into the 32K limit on a text field, and that will pretty much break your application. It's not going to work. Your users will be very unhappy about that. So consequently, everything does need to be converted into MIME. The funny thing is about MIME fields / rich text fields is once they do reach a certain point, a certain size point, they actually do it's a very clever but sometimes exasperating trick where they create these hidden file attachments that basically contain all of the MIME content, and then you can no longer actually see the content in the properties of the document. So but if you go with the MIME route, which is what this solution does, then you're not going to run into those limits. Otherwise, if you try to do with a text field, you're gonna be out of luck. So there it is. Again, I know it's a really rough cut video, and it took me quite a while to extract out the technique from our application and put it into this. To kind of get it to work this way, but I wanted to. Somebody had asked me about it last week, and I said, "Oh, I really should blog this." And Per Louston has been a nice guy by not badgering me for the last 6 months. After I said I would blog it 6 months ago. So there you go. If you have questions or ideas or thoughts on it, let me know. But hope this is helpful to somebody.